In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Hello, Sublation Media viewers, all of you communists and progressives and radicals out there. It's I, Douglas Lain. I am the head honcho of Sublation Media. I'm also the author of a short story entitled Noam Chomsky in the Time Box, which I will try to find a link to and put in the description to this stream if you guys want to read that. It's my evaluation of the politics of Chomsky, written, oh gosh, maybe 20 years ago now. I'm not quite sure when, but this is one that Benjamin Studebaker has read. And Benjamin, introduce yourself.
Yep, it's me, Benjamin Studebaker. I quite enjoyed Noam Chomsky in the Time Box. It's a great story. I'm the author of 2 books, The Chronic Crisis of American Democracy, The Way It's Shut, and Legitimacy in Liberal Democracies. All
right, so in this stream, we're going to do the thing that everybody who's in our milieu is obligated to do, which is to weigh in on the Chomsky-Epstein scandal. But I'm actually hoping that we can mostly avoid being caught in the scandal or participating in the scandal or perpetuating the unthinking ideology of this scandal. The way in this which the moralism of it drives people to abandon thought. I could say abandon politics, but it goes beyond that. But we should discuss the actual scandal itself. I wanted to talk about Adorno's notion of what he thought a personality was, touch on Christopher Lasch's culture of narcissism, to talk about what fame is in a capitalist society. And of course, I can't help but raise the society of the spectacle as a reflexive pattern in my thinking, but which is Guy Debord's notion. But yeah, shall we just start with, in case anyone has missed it who's watching, what the scandal actually is, and you can say what your thoughts are on it, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So the scandal is to do with emails between Noam Chomsky and Jeffrey Epstein, which indicate a much more detailed, in-depth, long-lasting relationship, very close relationship, than previously was known by the public.
Right. And I have the email here. Maybe I should just read it. So it's dated February 23rd, 2019, just about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Chomsky writes, "Have been thinking about your letter ever since I received it this morning. In fact, long before. Awful situation is always on my mind. And to a much lesser degree, Lawrence's 2 and other cases that I know about. First, on your suggestion about us, I think it's a good idea. In fact, I had agreed to it a long time ago. Valeria is putting together documentation about the matter that I can use. Second, the horrible way you are treated in the press and public. It's painful to say, but I think the best way to proceed is to ignore it. I've had plenty of experience, though, of course, not on this scale. A Google search will bring up tons of hysterical accusations of all sorts, even groups devoted to vilifying me. I pay no attention unless I'm approached for a comment on a specific matter. It's a nuisance, but it's the best way. The same conclusions from experiences of others, in some cases close friends. What the vultures dearly want is a public response, which then provides a public opening for an onslaught of venomous attacks, many from just publicity seekers or cranks of all sorts, which are impossible to answer. How do you prove that you're not a neo-Nazi who wants to kill Jews, or a rapist, or whatever charge comes along? That's particularly true now with the hysteria that has developed about abuse of women, which has reached a point that even questioning a charge is a crime worse than murder. For virtually everyone who sees any of this, the reaction will be, where there's smoke, there's fire, maybe raging fire. Whatever the facts, which few will even think of investigating. In general, it's best, I think, not to react unless directly questioned, particularly in the current mood, which I presume will fade away even if not in time to prevent such much torture and distress. Hard to say, but it's the best advice I can think of. Noam. So, I would love to hear what your thoughts are on the character of that letter. I mean, obviously, Chomsky knew very well that Epstein was guilty and was aiding and abetting him. He was driving the getaway car there, as Epstein was leaving his island. No, it just seems to me that if you presume, as Chomsky did, that Epstein hadn't committed crimes, this is exactly the kind of email you'd send to someone who's helping you and with your finances, right?
Clearly, they were friends, and clearly Chomsky presumed the innocence of his friend. Whether that was a reasonable thing to do or not do would depend on all of the other interactions that they had, not just in email, but in person, many of which can't be known by us.
Right.
The scandal starts on the basis that even associating with Epstein in any way, shape, or form after a specific date is morally implicating to the point at which somebody should be potentially driven from public life purely on the basis of this association. Nobody has accused Chomsky of a crime,
right,
of any kind, nor, of course, has he been convicted of a crime. And nonetheless, the aim is to socially sanction this person for an association without either an accusation of a crime or a conviction. What that says to me is that this scandal operates at a purely social level.
Right.
Right? It is not about criminality, and it's not about politics. It's purely about what social associations are or aren't acceptable on a moral level. Mm-hmm. And so because it works at a completely social level and doesn't involve actually litigating whether a crime was committed, it is a kind of consummately anarchist moral panic episode. People who don't think that the way to solve a problem is to litigate it politically or legally, but who think that all problems should in principle be solvable through social intercourse, will, of course, treat social violations as if they were criminal acts, and they will respond to what they consider to be social violations with the most punitive forms of ad hoc social behavior they can think of. So they go immediately to shunning, gossiping, trying to drive the person out of public life, trying to ruin the person's reputation, being very mean about them online. This is what people do who operate principally within the terrain of the social and who are not really comfortable with the political or the legal.
I want to throw a comment on the screen here. R worded one says, most crimes of capitalism operate at a purely social level. What are you talking about? And, that is not altogether true. I mean, there are, first of all, for something to be a crime under capitalism, and it has to be operating in the realm of the legal.
One of the things anarchists like to do is use the word crime to refer to acts that are not criminal acts, that have not been politically sanctioned, but which they morally disapprove of. So they start porting the language of crime and criminality into the social, to the point where the reflex response is to think that social acts can be criminal, even though they're not criminal in the eyes of the law. They have not been agreed through a legitimate political process to be criminal. Nonetheless, these acts should be treated as if they were criminal because anarchists don't do politics.
Right. But let's say there are things that are not crimes that we would want to object to. I think my phone's going off. Hold on, I'm going to turn off my phone. Like, for instance, the wage relation. That's not a crime. I don't think it really is altogether social in the way that you mean. I mean, it is of society. It is, the way in which we organize production in civil society. But when you say social, you mean something else than just
what's our
society.
Response to the wage relation? Our response to the wage relation ultimately has to be aiming at the political. It might not immediately be political. It might be pre-political at first. But we have to recognize that to change the wage relation or to overcome it would require a politics. We would have to actually create a new kind of political order in which the wage relation no longer operated in that way or at all.
Yeah, we can't simply morally condemn the wage relation, and we can't change it by determining who is acceptable to associate with and who is not.
Right. But this is what anarchists will do. Anarchists will say that people who are exploiters or who participate in the employer side of the wage relation are morally wrong for participating in these roles and should be socially sanctioned and shunned and talked down about on the basis that they are exploiters. And the people who have given space to this kind of argument, once you give space to it, you will eventually yourself be subject to it. So, for instance, somebody like Nathan Robinson at Current Affairs has often praised Chomsky and praised libertarian socialism. So he gets accused of having operated Current Affairs in a hierarchical way. And then once that accusation is issued, because he has made moral arguments of this kind and treated socialism as a moral position that involves socially sanctioning people, he himself then becomes subject to that same process. And the same goes for Chomsky, because Chomsky has spent most of his career making moral claims about these relationships and arguing that we ought to be sanctioning people on the basis of their moral behavior rather than propose and create and generate a new politics. He himself can then be subject to the same kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. I think maybe we should have more episodes like this one, and I'm not saying we should table this kind of political judgment of Chomsky right now exactly, but I do have a critique that isn't aimed specifically at anarchists. I think that I'm uncomfortable with laying all this on an anarchist ideology, maybe wrongly, because I feel like you said something before we started recording that it's really, he walked the line between progressivism and anarchism, and I just feel like it lets people off the hook a little bit to call it anarchism, because that's something that some people who may behave in the ways that you call anarchist wouldn't identify with. And also, as crazy as it is, if someone is ideologically an anarchist, they would, at least to some degree, can be compelled to think through their responses and to listen to critiques like yours. I think a serious anarchist, like who reads the journal, Anarchist magazine or whatever, has.
Are there serious anarchists in the 21st century? Is that a category that exists now still?
I don't know. I don't go to the info shops anymore, but there used to be like info shops, you could go to and you could go discuss Bakunin or whatever the current...
Bakunin in Bakunin's time is very different from reading Bakunin now and thinking of Bakunin as a guide to what you should do now. Bakunin in Bakunin's time is operating before the emergence of the total society, before the emergence of corporatism. All of these things have changed enormously our society. Anarchism in the 19th century, the early part of the 20th century, had an in-touchness with the context that made it a more plausible view. But once you get past World War II and you enter into this post-war, heavily integrated, heavily corporatized world of highly developed states, it becomes a much less plausible, less competitive view. I have written a journal article on Gandhi. I have respect for Gandhi. I have respect for historical anarchism. But after Gandhi died in 1948, I don't think there's been serious anarchism from that point forward.
Well, listen, and this is exactly the kind of thing that if you had been in an info shop in 1993, at the age of 1, and you could have managed to have this conversation, that people would have been interested in discussing with you, and rather than simply abandon anarchism. The idea is, well, how do we realize it under these conditions? What was true about it then that might be true now, like so forth and so on. But I'm not an anarchist. I for a variety of reasons. I do think my understanding of Marx and my kind of Marxism has some similar aims to anarchist aims, wanting to liberate and emancipate society from the wage relation or from capital, and ultimately from the need to be political in the sense of relying on bodies of men to settle the contradictions in society. So, but putting that all aside, let's put the $10 comment on the screen. Someone paid for this, and we are, after all, under a capitalist system. Crime is a construct. Crime is legal now. What is Studebaker on about? Note, I'm an atheist, and I find capitalism funny as hell, but never wholly moral. Okay, well, any comment on that? I mean, I don't think it, but we read it. You spent $10. We read it. Let's move on. So I want to go back to the real topic here, which is the destruction of the reputation of Noam Chomsky at the moment of his near death, when he's lying in a coma in the hospital. I'm not sure if he's actually in the hospital or at home, but he's not able to respond. He's had a stroke nearly 3 years ago now, and has been unable to be verbal or participate in social life since then. And what I am most bothered about here is the fact that Chomsky, who has been a major leftist figure since the late 60s, so for well over 50 years, coming on 60 years, who shaped so much of left activity in America and really around the world, who sort of set the standards for how to respond to world events, very influential after the attacks of 9/11, certainly during the Vietnam War, the Gulf War. He's always there as a figure to, if you wanted to know the correct radical opinion about any given event, you might turn to Chomsky. And so for him to be, leaving the stage in disrepute as a fallen figure, one that we no longer have to think about, but can just condemn, is a tragedy. Not that he was so. I'm not celebrating his career or his influence, but we're losing the opportunity with this to reflect upon the meaning of his life and his leftist politics. And I'm not saying that that reflection would give him a high grade, but it would at least be an opportunity for us to learn and to understand why someone like Chomsky was so appealing, and what was it about us that we turned to a figure like Chomsky, and what was it about me that I found him so appealing when I was 19, 20 years old. Anyway, go ahead, Ben.
Part of the trouble is that most of the people who are weighing in on this preside over an audience which operates in a very moralistic way.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore they live in terror of their audience's moral condemnation. So people are in a paranoid mode, rushing to try to demonstrate that they have the right moral attitude and to create distance between themselves and a figure that they think is going to ultimately taint them. And this is the problem with the left. The left has become a very anarchist milieu that is not comfortable with politics, is not comfortable with categories of legality or crime, and therefore, in a completely ad hoc social process that nobody can interrogate, that can't be subjected to questions of legitimation because there's no authority and there's no organized institutional procedure by which these decisions are taken. There's just a terror that runs through the left as people on the left try to get out in front of what they think the next wave of cancellation and shunning and opprobrium will be.
Well, what we should note is how not only, it not only do the thought leaders, the podcasters or the journalists or the authors or the filmmakers or whatever they might be, I guess these days it's just they're all internet influencers, right? But not only are they hemmed in by the mob, the moralistic mob, but worse, the moralistic mob is hemmed in. I mean, everyone has to form the correct moral attitude about whatever the latest contradiction, calamity, crisis, act of violence might be, and take the correct position in order to manage their reputation, which means you're incredibly easy to manipulate under those conditions. Everybody who is operating in that mode can be pushed around, led, and we've seen recently they can be led to sacrifice themselves in the streets. This
horizontalism and leaderless movements mean that you don't have any kind of structure for making decisions about who's in and who's out and what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no process you can appeal to if you're being treated unfairly, or you feel you're being treated unfairly. And there's an unwillingness to do this kind of stuff because people associate any attempt to construct a legitimate process with either replicating the problems with democratic socialism or social democracy, or replicating the problems with the Soviet Union and Leninism and Stalinism and Maoism. And so you have a deep discomfort on the part of large parts of the American left with both of those things. And therefore, there's a political vacuum. And in that political vacuum, this is all you get. And it makes people on the left extremely easy to divide and conquer. It makes them extremely easy to pit against each other. All you have to do is find some moral issue that you can excite some of them about, and then find others to be acting out of alignment. And a lot of it also stems from a kind of consensus fantasy that if we have an open discussion that's free, we'll all arrive at the same conclusion. And that's not the case. If we have an open discussion that's free, we will have intractable disagreements that will require political resolutions. And if you have a fantasy that you can do without political resolutions and political processes, then when you have disagreements, it will just result in recrimination, cancellation, people trying to ruin each other's lives, the end of friendships. And this is what the left has become. It's just a series of social struggles that are very internal and internecine, that have no political horizon at all.
Okay. I think that your explanation here has some truth to it, but I would just point out that this is also infected, both real political parties. Like the Republicans operate in this level, the Democrats operate this way. It is not merely a phenomenon of anarchists or the far left. It is, and very dramatically so, but it is not only there. And that's why I would point to
political parties are not going along with this sort of thing. Politicians who get accused of moral scandals are just denying things, or they're saying, yes, I did it, so what, come and get me. And unless you manage to get me through the courts, or you get me through a formal process, or you don't reelect me, I'm going to stick around. More and more politicians are refusing to resign in response to this kind of ad hoc social pressure, and are instead challenging its legitimacy and saying, if you really think that I've done something wrong, don't reelect me, charge me in court, convict me. And the whole time, if you do charge them in court, they say all the time, this is a witch hunt, I'm being persecuted unfairly, reelect me so that I can show that I have the support of the population. Real political thinkers are able to respond to social critique by demanding legitimation of what's being done to them.
I wasn't talking about, look, there's a difference, but there's a, Trump is maybe sui generis, but you can stand up to allegations of immorality and impropriety and scandal when they're seen to be coming from your political enemies. But I'm talking about the internal fights within the right and the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And I can't bring a really current one to mind, but I can bring one to mind that came up in the last decade and a half, like with Milo Yiannopoulos as an example. But there are all manner of ways in which I'll just call cancel culture, although I think it goes beyond that. I don't think that we should think of it in those terms only because it's too specific. As operative in society, in both political parties. That's what I would claim. Am I overclaiming, do you think?
I'm just saying I think it's in decline at the political level, because I think people who think politically have been able to challenge the legitimacy of cancel culture. Indeed, the expression cancel culture emphasizes this is a culture. This is something that's occurring purely at a social phenomenon, and it hasn't been grounded in appropriate political or legal processes. So it's suspect. Whereas the people who are comfortable with it don't regard it as a problem that it doesn't have a political or legal dimension, and think that they can just arrive at a kind of roving consensus about who should or shouldn't be canceled, who should or shouldn't be subjected to this, on the basis of their moral common sense, which they assume everybody shares with them.
Right. Well, I'll have to, that's really an empirical question, is the degree to which it's actually leaving the political realm. I think there certainly are signs that you're right. Okay. But as a leftist, I feel compelled to point out how those who are participating in the character destruction of Noam Chomsky in this moment are not only, failing to be political and being unkind and unnecessarily so to a man who's in a coma, and misreading the email, so forth and so on. I could get into the muck on this, but but beyond all that, they're missing the opportunity to actually judge the man and his political life, and to see what
you need politics to be able to have a reasonable discussion that can be sustained across time. And if you don't have the capacity to politically structure a conversation, then what will happen is that conversation will break down and barbarize. There is a need for, especially under anything resembling our current conditions, political structures that can make a conversation functional for a certain purpose. And the problem here is that these structures have all been disavowed and all been framed as evil and villainous. So no one is able to construct a conversation that can be sustained across time. And Nathan Robinson just put out a piece in Current Affairs just this past week about how there used to be this robust internet debating culture, and what happened to it? What happened to the capacity to have a conversation about issues with regard to arguments? Well, what happened is that there was no political process for managing all of that. And because there was no political process for managing all of it, it became extraordinarily internecine. And now what's happening is that tech oligarchs are playing the role in deciding how it's going to be structured. And the left is just getting completely boxed out.
Yeah. Okay. I think that might be right. But my question for you then is, I was tending to think with the concepts I raised, and I do want to try to get to them before the stream is over here, about the character, what a personality is according to Adorno, culture of narcissism, and so forth. But I do think that there were institutions that could manage thinking and debate and argumentation in a way that was more enlightening and didn't devolve into just character attacks and denunciations, and that those things didn't necessarily attach to a political party, and as institutions that was producing speech were protected from state involvement, or should have been.
The right has think tanks.
True. Yeah, and so does the left, or so do the Democrats.
Well,
right.
The universities and the journals, there are still some of these things, but if you're talking about the public mass online debate, that's a different ball of wax. And it's still the case that, there are peer-reviewed deliberations that go on in academic spaces, and there are think tank spaces that are funded by often quite right-wing wealthy individuals. But if you're talking about an open conversation on the internet that ordinary people can join and be benefited in some way by participating in, that really doesn't exist in the way that it did.
Right. But the thing about that open conversation is that it is actually been, it are the very people that might write for a journal or newspaper or produce a television segment or a YouTube video like this one are also participating in these social media platforms and the conversations there. And the conversation is not kept elevated at the level of actual thinking. Not maybe
no standards or rigor, no political standard, no political process by which standards of rigor can be applied. Just a question of, can you get eyeballs? Can you get attention? Can you get clicks? Can you get donations and followers, patrons, right? So a completely marketized mechanic for determining what counts as a valuable contribution. In the older kinds of legacy media spaces or in the universities or in the think tanks, there are standards apart from how many eyeballs can you get on something and how many clicks. And these things allow you to have political deliberation about what counts as a valuable contribution and to exclude things that don't count, even if they might get a lot of clicks and might draw a lot of attention.
Okay, so here's what I think I'm, as I'm listening, I think the reason why I'm not just completely endorsing what you're saying, because look, I do think what you're saying is absolutely true, right? But I want to go beyond it if I can. And I think the reason why I have that urge is because there's a assumption in what you're saying, at least that I'm hearing, and maybe it's just because you're saying it in this format, that the public doesn't have those standards or never had those standards themselves in society, that those standards were imposed in some way, or that when you require politics to impose, that's why I said, well, the state couldn't intervene. But what I want to get at is how we developed into kind of people that no longer think politically, but rather think in terms of personality, in terms of celebrity and reputation and character, and how that emerged. I mean, I guess it emerged. It doesn't even seem related when I think back on how it emerged, but it did emerge through the normal political electoral process where candidates would run as characters or as based on their character and their morality as much or more than as on their policies and their visions for the future of the country and things like that. So, and that seemed to become exceptionally the case for all political activity after the 60s. And Todd Gitlin is a former member of SDS who's written about this, about the way in which the necessity to create a celebrity representation within a media sphere led to the corruption of left politics. Right.
Rise of populism, decline of the party form. I would just clarify, when I say politics, I don't necessarily mean related to the state. I mean a capacity to take decisions in cases where there's intractable disagreement without producing consensus, without dissolving the disagreement. People being able to stay in the same organization and accept a decision that they don't agree with on the basis that it occurred through a process that they nonetheless are committed to and support. Some level of mediation. And lots of non-state organizations have some level of capacity to do this. Corporations have politics in the sense that corporations have a mechanism for, if you disagree with a coworker about what to do, there's a formal process by which that disagreement can be resolved. You don't split and go start your own company every time there's a disagreement. But if you don't have formal processes that you can appeal to, that people can sign up to, and that can sustain some level of cohesion across time, then disagreement tends to proliferate and spill out and produce dysfunction instead of being in some way shaped, formed, directed toward a purpose.
Right. Here's another comment from J5L5M6, which is a great username. Politicking is an art form all itself. Studebaker's point seemed to be baseball players shouldn't be rated the same as cricket players. Well, yeah, we get that. What are you offering up? Regardless, I still enjoy Noam, spelled with an E. But that was a $20 comment. So thank you very much. People, please do use the donate button when you comment. I forget what that's even called. But thank you for your contribution. Ben, do you want to respond to that? Or
I have written stuff about other kinds of political proposals elsewhere. I did a series of pieces for the Strike Council on supranational federalism. The issue, of course, is that we have not been able to find another kind of politics that the left is able to unite around. And I'm under no illusions that anything that I might propose would solve this problem. There is an actual problem that the left has with the political as such, which makes it very difficult even to introduce political proposals and have them talked about as something that people could potentially agree to. And for that reason, our discourse remains incorrigibly social rather than political.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to just I want to footnote that and say, as someone who's aligned with the Campaign for a Socialist Party, which is a project of civil society organizing, which
aims at a party, a political intervention.
It does, right? It's political intervention, but it's pre-political. I do think that we're going to have to operate on the level of the social for a time to do the organizing.
But you can't operate with people who are anti-political, because you can't be pre-political with people who are anti-political.
Okay, fair enough.
Anarchists are anti-politics.
Okay. Moving beyond, I mean, look, you're doing a great job, Ben, because you're talking about the limits of Chomsky's actual political project. And it's a fair critique. Okay. It's an absolutely fair critique. One that I don't entirely disagree with. I do have some qualms about.
My thing about anarchism and do
the
Adorno stuff.
Yeah, let's do that. So I want to run a clip. This is an excerpt from Minima Moralia that I think applies to Chomsky, although I didn't put this together originally in response to anything about Chomsky, but here it is. Tell me what you think of this. Fame, which had something accidental and stagey about it, and yet also a glimmer of justice and free choice, has been liquidated as a result of the objective processes of the market society. It has entirely become a function of paid propaganda bureaus, and is measured in terms of the investment being wagered by the name bearer or interest group which stands behind it. One takes control of the process of becoming famous, and thereby, to a certain degree, also their afterlife, for what has a chance of being remembered in a thoroughly organized society which is not already familiar, and purchases the expectation of immortality only no longer from the church, but henceforth from the lackeys of trusts. But there is no blessing therein. Just as capricious memory and utter oblivion always went together, so too does the planned disposition of fame and memorialization lead irresistibly into nothingness. The famous are not happy. They turn themselves into brand name articles, alien and incomprehensible to themselves. As living pictures of themselves, they are like the dead. In the pretentious concern for their aura, they waste the substantive energy, which alone is capable of perpetuation. The inhuman indifference and contempt which is immediately meted out to the fallen giants of the culture industry reveals the truth about their fame, without giving those who partake in scorning that fame any better hope for posterity. Thus, intellectuals discover the frailty of their secret motives, and the only help against such is to express this insight. What did you make of that?
You know, it had me thinking a bit about the Peter Mandelson thing in the UK.
Okay.
You know, because with Peter Mandelson, you have a kind of image that he very much possessed in British politics, a kind of avatar position that he had. And then that image has been destroyed by the particular way in which he behaved. In that case, it's not just a moral scandal of an association with Epstein, it's that he leaked government information to Epstein. And in doing that, betrayed the government and betrayed the New Labour movement, which he was the avatar of. So there's a sense in which his offense is political, but it's made the symbolic position that he previously occupied impossible, and then imploded all of the different relationships in British politics that were grounded on that symbolic position in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe something similar is going on with Chomsky. When I initially, looked at the Mandelson thing, to me, it had this symbolic aesthetic character to it that the Chomsky thing didn't have so much. But maybe the Chomsky thing also has got it. I'd love to hear your take.
Well, my thought around that excerpt from Minima Moralia when it comes to Chomsky was that you had to look at Chomsky as someone who was famous, who had become a symbol in the discourse or in the spectacle or what have you, and that what was great about the Minima Moralia excerpt is that Adorno is not sitting in judgment of those who seek fame, but kind of from the inside explaining how and why it seems like a necessary aim for the intellectual, because having your ideas survive, have influence, leave a legacy, seems to require achieving a fame, reaching an audience, but in an administered society, to reach an audience means to conform to what has already been established and to work well within certain kinds of limits. And what we might do is explore what those limits are. But in the Mandelson case, what were the limits that he was operating within as a political symbol?
In the Mandelson case, whereas, say, Tony Blair became associated with Iraq and Gordon Brown became associated with the global economic crisis, Mandelson remained sort of a purely political figure tied to New Labour in itself. So he came to be the kind of symbol of New Labour, to the point where people who opposed New Labour referred to him as the Prince of Darkness. So your attitude to Mandelson, whether you are seen palling around with Mandelson or you have been aided in your career by Mandelson, sent a clear message about how you related to New Labour. And this was a kind of aesthetic message above all else, because Mandelson was this aestheticized celebrity figure with this mystique. Whether you were tied to Mandelson or you negated Mandelson, positioned you in an aesthetic way, even more than, say, what you might believe about certain substantive political issues. You could more easily separate Labour politicians with regard to their attitude to Mandelson than you could on specific policy matters. But now that Mandelson is in disgrace in a political sense because he's a traitor to New Labour itself, having betrayed a New Labour government, all of the people who showed that they were committed to New Labour and friendly with the New Labour movement by tying themselves in various ways to Mandelson now find that this doesn't work at all for them. Now they're tainted by him. And conversely, people who were anti-Mandelson seem to have a kind of triumph, but this triumph is purely aesthetic because it doesn't actually empower them to regain control of the Labour Party or to change what has happened over the last 30 or 40 years in the UK. So it gives them this ersatz of triumph, which they can't actually politically use.
Okay. Now I'm understanding it better now. I'm sorry, I kind of get distracted by comments we were speaking before. So what I would say is, if we're trying to map those two things, the Chomsky scandal and this political scandal in the UK together, there certainly is a faction within the contemporary left which is seeming to be triumphant as Chomsky is put aside. And so what did Chomsky represent? He represented a way to be an anti-imperialist within the realm of liberalism. He was often criticized for being too attached to the First Amendment and to individualism. And he also would say things that were out of step, like, of all the nations on earth, the United States is the freest. It's also the most violent, he would say, and the most oppressive internationally. And those things are not in contradiction. But it's better to live in the United States with the relative protections for free citizens and anywhere else in the world, Chomsky would say. So the kind of anti-American left, the anti-imperialist left that's attached to that, and then the Stalinists, the straight up Stalinists, all of them are doing victory laps around this Chomsky being in disgrace. And you'll see people talk about, I forget the guy's name all of a sudden. I think it probably neurotically or as an act of aggression. But it's not Lasordo, but his Greg Rockhill is coming up.
Gabriel Rockhill, right?
Gabriel Rockhill, and then Parente. Whoa. Chomsky was never as good as Michael Parente. It's really unfair to both of them to do this in this moment. There's lots of things that Michael Parente did that were worth taking note of. I mean, but they're making this distinction to justify the neo-Stalinism that's somewhat appearing as a way to have a personality online. But not any kind of actual political position.
So maybe for you, Chomsky was the last, and kind of in line with the Frankfurt School, of theorists who were critical of the United States, but still recognized the ways in which the United States was politically freer or better in some way, shape, or form than the Soviet Union or Maoist China. And so now to be critical of the United States, you have to also take up some other flag. You have to be pro-China, pro-BRICS, pro-something else. You can't have a criticism in general of nationalism. You have to choose a flag, choose your fighter.
Right.
And the people who want everyone to choose a flag, choose their fighter, Chomsky was perhaps one of the last few living people who didn't conform to that, who had a significant level of symbolic presence. And for you, the loss of that figure and the tainting of him further estranges us from not just Chomsky, but perhaps from the Frankfurt School theorists like Adorno that you do think ought to be taken more seriously.
Perhaps. I mean, I am hopeful that won't be the effect, but because it's not as if Chomsky had any truck with the Frankfurt School, right? I think he would have lumped them all in as postmodernists or theory people, and he had a total disdain for that and for Marxism.
Yeah,
right.
But just in the sense that it pointed at a particular combination of positions that now seems to be impossible to replicate with regard to foreign policy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, I think, but really, what's most unfortunate, I mean, because I don't think I think this is a Pyrrhic victory for the Stalinists, and it will last about a minute, and no one really wants to grant them much. Ultimately, they'll, it's just because they're all trapped in the same system as the Majority Report or Breonna Joey Gray. They have to appeal to the same audience, and they're going to be kicked around by that audience, just as.
I thought you turned that phone off.
I just, no, I didn't. I hung up on the person calling, but I didn't turn it all the way off. I'll turn it off now if I can.
I got you.
I'm old. I get confused by my phone. So
it happens.
Okay. Yeah. So anyhow, that's my opinion about the political significance of the moment. But it's it's a missed opportunity. Chomsky's passing, conceivably in a counterfactual world, might have been an opportunity to reflect and to write seriously and to think seriously and to discuss him in a serious way. And now that opportunity is lost.
See, that's how I feel about the Mandelson thing.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the Mandelson thing, really pulls on people who were at least thinking about politics to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And the Mandelson thing has a political valence to it, because what Mandelson did was not purely a moral scandal. When it was purely a moral scandal, the British press and the Labour Party were entirely inclined to wave it off and allow him to continue to be a factor. There was this Times puff piece that was published based on an interview that occurred before the revelations of the political betrayal, but after it was well established that he had had a social relationship with Epstein. And in that Times puff piece, they were entirely inclined to try to suggest that the moral stuff is not important. The British discourse could get past and over and around that. But once the political thing happened, now there's an impression on the part of the Labour left that they can somehow politically benefit from this situation, which isn't true. And the mistake that they're making is going to result in them wasting a lot of time. But I think that there's an interesting opportunity there, because in the case of the British political system, the failure of the Labour Party to solve the crisis is an opportunity for people who recognize a need for politics to further recognize that they're not going to find the politics that they need in the Labour Party, and to look for an alternative form of politics outside that space. And to me, those people are more likely to be helpful in constructing an alternative than the Chomsky fans, because the Chomsky fans have a certain immaturity with regard to the political that it's very difficult to convince them out of or talk them out of, because insofar as you criticize this, it seems to them that you're endorsing hierarchy and endorsing evil and not being morally correct. So to argue with them about their immaturity gets you accused of being a bad person who excuses the state or excuses its behavior. Whereas when you're dealing with people who are dealing with the Labour Party in the UK and the Starmer government's inability to solve the crisis, there you have an opportunity for people to go, hey, you recognize there's a problem in the UK. You may have thought that you could help the Starmer government in some way and that problem would be solved. But look, it isn't solved. You can't solve it by electing the Starmer government. And look at who's benefiting in the UK from the way the Starmer government is failing to solve the problem. It's not you. It's other factions in UK politics that are benefiting. And this could be, I think, a helpful lesson that you could then port into other contexts, which is why my impulse was to talk about Mandelson rather than Chomsky.
Right. I understand. And look, in terms of actual living politics, you might be right. This is maybe inside baseball, because it doesn't really matter who has standing in the nominal left right now.
It's can you crat?
Say again?
Can you crat?
Can you crat? What is that?
Democrat, autocrat. Right. I'm doing can you crat? Can you rule? Who can crat?
What are you talking about, youngster? Can you crat?
Yeah, can you crat? We have to. You have to be able to crat if you're going to, change anything. And people who can't crat and who are hostile to the idea that they need to crat, somebody has to crat.
I've needed to crat for days. No, right. Can you do politics? And right now the left as it is can only be done to, it cannot act on its own. It can be
right.
It can be led, can be used, but it cannot act independently or even think independently at the moment.
We still have a few minutes. You should do something on the personality.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about, right. So this is important because the personality is offered up precisely as a kind of consolation prize after the administered society has its way with you and limits your ability to actually be an independent individual. It's the scar tissue of that's left behind after you've been cut down to size. So rather than independently and individually finding your way in the world to shape it, you've been shaped by the world into a type, and you then cling to this personality, and celebrities come along to represent different types to different demographics, and as commodities of the personality. There were I forget the guy's name, but there was a book called about pseudo events, and the celebrity is a figure of the pseudo event.
Yeah,
so these are
exemplar.
Yeah, these are people who are famous for being famous. They may have done other things. They may have some true competencies or even true accomplishments. But often enough, what they're most well known for is representing a type of personality. And they don't have to be particularly skilled or accomplished or competent to represent that type.
Yeah. And whereas an exemplar has virtues that you might potentially acquire and performs a social role that you might actually perform, the main function of the celebrity is to mislead you about what's possible, to lead you down a primrose path, which will result in you wasting your life.
Right. And also to reduce reduce you to basically to the level of consumption, to someone who has a self in relation to commodities, or to demographics, or to what has already been accomplished. So, I mean, look, I'm not trying to knock anybody for being like this, because I'm like this too, but you might define yourself by the hobby you have, or the kind of music you like, or the fashion that you wear, or the color of your skin. And all of these are you're representing a type that's being produced in this society. And when we're arguing about the morality of Chomsky, we're trying to do maintenance to our personality, and establish that we're not of his type, which is now being discarded. Right? So we want to make sure that we remain within the realm of the still relevant personality.
And the hysteria comes because so many people have tried to be like Chomsky, and now all of a sudden have to give this up and have to make a show of giving it up because it's evident that they have tried to be like him in the past.
Yes. Right. Well, what they're trying to do is hold on to the personality type and eject the particular instantiation of it, the OG, or
yeah, in some cases. And then in other cases, there are people who want to get rid of the type along with the man. So you have
but those aren't the people
who are willing to dump the man to save the type, and people who want to get rid of the type along with the man. And these people have something in common, which is they're willing to destroy the man. So the bulk of the discussion consists of people who are willing to destroy the man for their own purposes, whether that's to save their own ability to be the type or to destroy the type which the man was of.
Right. And I think that those who are trying to hold on to the type but destroy the man are going to win out. I think there's just more of them. And I think that they have a politics which is much more adaptable to
I don't know. The Brickster stuff, I think, has made a lot of progress. I wouldn't say that people have become Stalinists, but I think there's a lot of xenophilia in parts of the left at this stage.
Okay. Maybe you're right. Maybe the gray zone types are going to win the day. But I do think that if the more that the left embraces that type, the more marginal it will become. The not being marginal and being more effective in your participation in what is particularly to be admired or sought after. But what I do think that it's important to recognize that there is an alternative to that, which is to, first of all, destroying the man is irrelevant right now. Noam Chomsky is in a coma. He is at death's door. He will be destroyed by time eventually. The question is destroying the reputation of who Chomsky was, which ultimately amounts to destroying historical memory. It amounts to trying to even after his death destroy his significance, to cross out, erase whatever legacy he might have accomplished. And that is not the way to overcome the politics of Chomsky, to forget and blot out. Do you have to work through and recall if we're going to have any chance of overcoming his politics.
But to tell anarchists that they have to do something provokes one response and one response only.
Yeah. Which is fuck
F
you,
Dad.
Yeah, right. Well, anyhow, we talked now for exactly an hour. I think I've said everything I wanted to say. Maybe not as well as I could have, and not without interruptions from my smartphone, which one day I'll figure out what these things do. But yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. We will have a second half in about 5 to 10 minutes in the Parrot Room and Patreon, and join us there for more. And become a patron. Give us some money. We will not go to Jeffrey Epstein to help get financial advice in the future because he's dead. But anyway, thank you very much, and we'll see you over there.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.